Eden Jonjo. I'm Kenyan, married with 4 kids, based out here in Nairobi. I'm an accountant by profession, so I also went through Strathmore. Then it was Strathmore College of Accountancy. I qualified as a CPA in '97, and for 21 years I worked for the Coca-Cola company in various roles. I managed the business in the west coast of Africa, and in my tail end of my career with Coca-Cola, I managed the business in West and Central Africa as a president, and I was looking after 33 countries. Now, I started Twiga 6 years ago. And, there's a bit of interference there. So I started Twiga 6 years ago. I co-founded the business. My co-founder was running the business, and then I was a non-executive director. And then last year we made a switch. Now I'm the CEO. He's moved to a non-executive role, and him and I, we've started up another startup. So he's now based in San Francisco, but we will manage the business out of Cape Town in South Africa. And yeah, so far this is what I'm doing on a full-time basis. So great. What questions do you have?
Interesting. Thank you for the introduction, and congratulations. And we're looking forward to learning more from your end. So maybe the first question that we're really interested in knowing how your innovation creates the three-way benefit. That is the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit.
Okay. So the thing is that the way we look at innovation is not a means, it's not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. And I think the key thing is that, it's always going back to what problem are we trying to solve? Because then it allows us to then have better context in terms of how you look at your triple bottom line. Gosh, I've not used words like those since I was working in Coca-Cola. So the thing is that right now in sub-Saharan Africa, I think consumers are spending about 50% of their disposable income on food. And this was before we had COVID, where we had a disruption in the disposable incomes. So if you're having a significant amount of money going to people feeding themselves, it means that, a significant part of the population is really struggling. And just to give you context, the United States was spending about 52% of its disposable income on food in the 1870s. So that's about 150 years ago. If you look at the number today, it's about 10% of disposable income. So we're spending an average of 4x what consumers in the US spend on as a percentage of their disposable income. And that's a huge, huge differential. Now, when you start clicking onto the reason why is it that we're spending that much money on food? And you start seeing some of the things out there. For example, our food production is not commercialized. There's just so much waste. And when you start thinking about, why is it that we can't figure this out? Then what you realize is that because we have a very fragmented retail, for example, Nairobi has 6.5 million residents. If you look at the greater metropolis, from Athi River to Machakos to Thika, Kiambu, that whole area. And when you think about that whole metropolis, 6.5 million people fed through 180,000 vendors. And that's a huge number of retailers. If you look at the US, chances are the top 15 big retailers account for 70% of the market. So because of this level of fragmentation, we don't have efficient supply chains when it comes to food. So what we're trying to do now is to use technology to aggregate retail demand in this informal retailers, and through that, then start putting together this efficient supply chains. So when I think about things like people, today for us as we do this, we're also creating a lot of opportunities for people. Today we have about 1,000 employees working for Twiga. which means that, we've created jobs to a lot of folks out there. When we look at our customers, every week we serve about 14,000 unique customers. Those are 14,000 customers who are receiving goods delivered directly to their doorstep, getting higher quality, lower priced commodities. So again, that is a part of the impact that we look at. And the thing is that when I look at farmers, we have in excess of about 15,000 farmers that we've been working with in terms of aggregating produce and delivering that to the retailers. And of course, when you look at the processed food, there's like countless number of manufacturers whom we're starting to really improve the way they distribute food into the community. So that's what I would look at in maybe terms of people. In terms of planet, there's of course a lot of work that we're doing in terms of efficient production of food. So one of the biggest things for us is around the reduction of post-harvest losses. What you find is that, in most African countries, when you look at fresh value chains, about 30 to 50% of produce is lost due to poor handling and just poor post-harvest management. So, and the key thing for us is that we've managed to reduce that number by about 70% without any refrigeration, just by virtue of being very, very efficient. So reducing the amount of food we throw away is very, very important for us. And the other thing also is that, from a planet standpoint, we started started piloting a lot of what I'd call precision agriculture. So in one of the farms, actually, we just installed IoT devices. So now we're getting readings like soil moisture, wind, temperature, humidity in real time. So, and that allows us to really start optimizing the yield of those types of farms. We're now using things like drone surveillance as a way of looking at yield management, because now with flying a drone over a farm, we're able now to do things like a crop census and understanding, crop density and how does that impact yield. And so far we have 2 companies that we're trialing with satellite imagery. And the whole idea is getting satellite imagery and using a bit of advanced analytics just to understand how you can actually improve yield or productivity in a particular area. Because now, if you have a GPS coordinates of a piece of land, you're able to see, for example, the precipitation patterns over the last 5 years, and essentially just allows you to get more out of that piece of land, but in a more sustainable way. So again, a lot of things that we're doing there from a planet standpoint. And the thing is that when we look at profit, key thing is when you look at most of our retailers, we're actually delivering product to them at a lower cost. So which means that they're actually able to generate a higher margin of that product and making their businesses more sustainable. And the key thing for us as Twiga, of course, we have shareholders in the business. We now, and we're essentially having a growing list of investors. In October, we closed out with Goldman Sachs in our Series B round. And I think so far, we've, it's public information. So far, we've raised close to about $60 million in capital. And the whole idea is now to leverage this to really build a scalable business, not just in Kenya or in East Africa, but across the continent. And hopefully that would then be rewarding to the shareholders who've taken a risk on us. So I hope that gives you like a high level picture of where we are.
Interesting. And we'd also like to know what are your annual sales, and most probably how would you describe your innovation in terms of what exactly is the innovation chosen and what category does it belong to? How disruptive is it? or rather, what kind of innovations does it displays in the market?
Okay, first thing is for a company like us, we have public and non-public information. Unfortunately, our revenue is non-public.
Okay. Okay.
So one day when we have an IPO, then you can Google it.
Interesting.
So, but the thing is that in terms of the innovation, the way we think about our innovation is, if you look at the whole supply chain, what we're trying to do is remove friction to commerce. That's a way to just think about the innovation. So before we had Twiga, the option that a retailer has is to wake up at 4 a.m. to go to the local wholesale market, buy the goods, make sure they're back in the shop so they can open by 8 a.m. And yeah, so now all they have is an app where they fill in all their requirements, and it gets delivered the next day. And the thing is that maybe previously they had to go shopping for a loan, you know, mobile money and all that. Now with a click of a button, you apply for a loan and it's approved in 2 seconds. Actually, it's not 2 seconds. It's about 0.8. Sorry about that. Sorry about misleading you.
Okay, and what would you say are the value chains involved, and whom are they replacing, or rather, whom are you replacing in the market within the value chain that you will describe to us?
We're replacing wholesalers on the processed food side. On the fresh produce, we're replacing middlemen or the brokers who are going and buying produce in the farms. So those are, so essentially the way to think about it is we are disintermediating the food value chain.
Interesting. And maybe just to move on, how would you describe your value creation? How do you create value to the society and the entire country where you are in at the moment?
Oh, that's what I had described earlier. So the way we create value is that we lower the price of food.
Mm-hmm.
So think about it this way. If today consumers are spending 55% of their disposable income on food, if you're to lower that amount to 40%, that's 15% of disposable income that you've released back into the economy. So it means that consumers can buy, can entertain themselves, which essentially creates an industry. They can buy more, maybe apparel. That's another industry. They can spend more on transportation. That's another industry. So essentially, it starts spurring other sections of the economy. And that's why you find that for countries that actually spend a low amount of money on food as a percentage of their disposable income, you'll find other thriving sectors that we don't have in our part of the world. So just to give you an example, I mean, like South Africa, the 7 largest retailers account for 60% of total retail. So because of that level of consolidation in the market, there's very efficient production of food. So if you think about large farmers, there's a lot of large farms, very efficient in South Africa. And when you go there, you feel it, because you go out for dinner and you spend a fraction of what you'd spend in Kenya.
True.
So the key thing is that because of that, it starts opening up other sectors. So now South Africans spend about 16% of their disposable income on food. And for the 84%, you see it in the economy. You see it in the sectors that are there. You see it in the entertainment. You see it in the restaurants. You see it in all that. And that's essentially the value that we want to create in the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. How do we then reduce the amount of money people have to spend on food? Because then that has a huge economic impact in the country.
I have a question, Peter, on pricing and the quality of the product. So when I looked at the website, it said that you do quality sourced products. And what does that mean in terms of, I've done a bit of farming for export, and I know the struggles in terms of what chemicals or what pesticides do you put in the products. Do you also do follow-up with the local farmers, and how do you help them in the process in terms of producing quality products?
So what we're doing right now is that we're actually moving more towards larger contracted farmers, because the key thing is that, you know, and I think there's always a narrative around the small farms. But when you think about those small farms, in most instances, the level of informality does not allow you to really have this traceability, for lack of a better word. So right now, with our larger contracted farmers, we're starting to actually get all of them certified on Global GAP. Because then that allows us to have traceability and to actually manage MRL levels within, for example, European food safety standards. So that's a whole ethos around our safe food. And actually, by March of 2021, we want to get to a point where we can then say that all our produce is actually Global GAP certified when you see it being sold on the streets. And that's essentially a big objective around that. That involves a lot of work. And one of our investors, the International Finance Corporation, we're working together in building capability at farm level to help us manage this dynamic.
Thank you.
Peter, I have a question. Sorry.
It does. Thank you.
Yes, Padma.
So actually, I wanted to ask you, how do you measure the economic impact? But you already answered it, saying 15% of disposable income goes back into the economy through various sectors. But that is more from the consumer's side. How do you measure impact from the farmer's side? Like, do you have something like, okay, 8,000 farmers across Kenya, their purchasing power now has increased from X to X% because of their involvement with Twiga, something like that.
So the thing is that what we do is that we don't measure that. And by the way, the 15% is a number that I gave to highlight the impact, because at the end of the day, for a company like Twiga to actually have that level of scale in impacting a country means that we have to be, of course, a much larger organization than we are today. So, and hopefully we will be in a couple of years to have that level of impact. But on the farmer side, I think the biggest impact is around market access, structured market access to the domestic market. Because you see, the key thing is that for a lot of these farmers, you know, when you don't have this structured market access, what it then does is it creates uncertainty in terms of farming. And that's why farming is really not professionalized. Just to give you an example of what the impact would look like. Say agriculture accounts for about 30% of Kenya's GDP. If you look at commercial banks, only about 2% of their balance sheet has exposure to the agricultural sector. And that 2% is essentially export farmers. And the reason why it's export farmers is because they already have structured access to international markets. So because most of them are actually selling to formalized organizations. So you can see that even from an access to capital standpoint, there's already an imbalance because no one's actually lending to the local farmers because of the level of informality that you have, even in terms of the access to the markets. Now, you'd expect that maybe the government, due to the fact that agriculture accounts for 30% of GDP, that government would actually be spending a significant amount of money on agriculture. Historically in Kenya, that number is between 3.5% to 3.8%. So of the total budget. Now, it means that then you ask, okay, so who's the government spending this money on? And the thing is that they're buying subsidies for maize farmers, subsidized fertilizer, subsidized seed, subsidized this. And then we end up producing maize at the most uncompetitive price globally. So because the thing is that, you know, we're actually trying to produce crops where we don't have a competitive advantage on, even from a geographical standpoint, and trying to subsidize that. So the question is, why not just import all the cheapest maize that you can get out there, and then use our land for something else that actually is more valuable? So those are the things that you kind of see, and that's all because of the informality of the markets. So farmers are actually starved of capital. So hopefully, once we start giving them this structured access to markets, and that should actually change the dynamics.
Okay, very clear, Peter. Thank you. Peter, it's almost 30 minutes. I mean, do you have time? Some more time? I mean, we don't want
Maybe
to kind
just,
of...
5 minutes max, because my day is back to back.
Okay, so
Okay.
we'll try to kind of be super fast. Washington, next question.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I'll try to combine these two questions just to wrap up from my end. How would you say that 1, 2, 3 are the impacts that you're creating on the SDGs, and how do you measure them? You've actually tried to measure your impact on the customer and the market itself. And lastly, I'd also like to actually understand how replicable your innovation is. Actually, you already hinted on the scalability fact, and that is clear enough for us given the partnership and the funding you're attracting from the likes of Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. So on the SDGs, to be honest, I don't. I've not taken time to measure against the SDGs. The thing is that it's important. The key thing is that what we've done is that to ensure that the way we think about the business, it more or less aligns to the SDG framework. Because the key thing is that, you know, starting to measure against the specific SDGs means that then we're spending some resources around monitoring and evaluation against those SDGs. And the question is, to get to that level of specific monitoring for a company like ourselves, what's the return, right? So, but the key thing is that, you know, but if we have stakeholders, I mean, we'll always have our partners, you know, who come in, who are mainly in the DFI space. And what they do is, if they want something specific, they're able to then do research using our ecosystem and maybe develop something that is a lot more specific to suit their needs. Because I think this is like, it's a macro tool in terms of how societies can be advanced and reducing things like absolute poverty and increasing levels of education. But I think the key thing is that I would say that the way we're structured, yes, we have positive impact, but we're not tracking what we're doing on each SDG. Maybe when we get to $1 billion in revenue, I will definitely invest in SDG tracking.
Okay, and just to understand, what is your comment on replicability of your innovation?
Well, the thing is that, you know, I had the fortune of directly managing about 40 countries across sub-Saharan Africa when I was working with Coca-Cola. So, so I understand Africa well. It's the same problem. You go to DRC, it's basically a street in Kenya, replace the signage from English to French. There we go. So it's so there's a lot of similarities across the continent. You will have nuances in different places, but 70 to 90% of our retail is informal. So which means that if that's a level of informality you have in retail, these problems have been replicated in all those markets.
Okay. So we have like 5 to 6 minutes remaining. So guys, feel free to ask extra questions or to seek more clarification on
I have
this.
a question. When I read about your investment with Goldman Sachs, there was also a bit of information about you going into FMCGs. What products are those? Is it farming, still under farming products, or what are they? And what was the motivation around that?
No, it's basically food products.
Okay.
Because what happens is that, you go to an informal retail, they're like, yes, you're bringing me bananas, but can you bring me maize flour? Can you bring me sugar? Can you bring me rice? So it was a natural progression based on where we are.
Okay, thank you.
I have one last question, Peter. So this course we are doing is a part of the global network course. We have students from all continents around the world. And then when we were asked to choose an org that is creating an impact, we chose Twiga because when we were reading about it, we saw the kind of impact it was creating for farmers, in terms of food losses and so on. So when you started out, when you conceptualized Twiga, did you have this impact in mind, or was it just like, okay, let's set up a agriculture marketplace in Kenya, and then eventually these impacts started happening? Or you got my question?
Okay, that's basically an entrepreneurial question. Normally, when you start a business, it's not, you don't think about an elaborate strategy. So what happened initially is that we saw a huge market in bananas. We wanted to sell bananas and make some money. So it was that simple. So, and we're actually looking at export. Then, so we spent all the money, we put everything together, went to Dubai, and then we didn't sell bananas. We didn't even sell one banana. Our pricing was so high, the quality was off, and all that. So we came back to Kenya. We're like, gosh, we've spent all this money trying to sell bananas in export. So do we just walk away from all this, or what do we do? And we're like, okay, why don't we then sell this locally? And that's how we started. And as we tried to sell bananas locally, we started discovering the size of the problem. And then from bananas, we moved to potatoes, and we moved to this, we moved to that. And then we're like, gosh, why is all this stuff selling? Then you ask yourself another question, and then you start realizing how everything is structured and the impact that you're creating. And then you keep on building on it, because at times growth and strategy is an iterative process. So, and as you take little steps, you then have a higher level of awareness about the problem that you're trying to solve and how that's coming together. So I wouldn't say that we had figured it all out in the beginning.
Very clear, Peter. Thank you so much.
Any last question? Great, fantastic. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed this, and I wish you all the best on your program. And let's see where this takes you guys.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Peter, for your time and sharing with us.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, and we're really looking forward to reading and learning more from your end.
No, thank you so much, and all the best. And yeah, and I hope you guys found this session useful and provides insights to what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Peter.